Hey everyone, I'm Steve Smith, aka Ardalis of NimblePros. In this video, we're going to look at how to easily implement your very own simple specification pattern to use with EF Core and your repository implementation. You can find the samples on GitHub under my .NET Data Access Tour repository. So we're inside of this repository. You can see there's a bunch of different options here that you can use to see different ways to do data access in .NET. We're going to focus on option 9, which is where we're going to use a repository with our own specification. So here's what that code is going to look like. You can define your specification, well, new it up here. We'll look at the definition in just a second, and then just pass it into the repository. When you use the specification pattern combined with repository, this is generally what your code is going to look like. Now, in this case, we're not adding mapping to the specification. We're going to let that happen outside. And so you'll see here when I need to get back a DTO, I'm going to do that mapping logic myself inside the controller in this case, but wherever outside of your actual repository implementation. That's usually where I prefer to do it anyway, since a lot of times these DTOs don't really belong as part of your data access logic or your domain logic. They're usually part of your web API or your UI layer. All right, so how does this thing actually work? Next, let's look at our repository interface. Inside the interface, we're going to define all the different methods that we need. And one of the things that you'll notice here is that this author repository doesn't have custom methods for things like list authors by state or list authors with books or whatever you might need. In this case, we only have the standard sort of CRUD methods, but instead of having simple get by ID and list with no parameters, we're taking in an author specification for both of those. So now let's look at what that specification includes. Here you can see that it has two pieces, basically two properties. The first one is a predicate, and that is of type expression of func of author comma bool. That's the exact same type that you use when you use the link where statement. So when you pass a lambda to a link where statement, it's an expression of func of t comma bool, where t is the thing that you're doing a dot where on, that collection. Next, we have a func of I queryable of author, comma, I includable queryable of author, comma, object. Now that whole crazy type is what you get when you say dot include inside EF Core to eager load a related table or set of entities. And so this is going to be our include expression. And again, it's just another set of properties. Now we can use these inside of our repository implementation. So inside of the EF author repository that implements our interface, you can see that in the getBySpec method, which is going to return a single author, we're going to use that expression for include here, and then we're going to use the predicate here to get the first or default author that matches that predicate. Likewise, we're going to do basically the same thing in our list method. We'll apply the predicate, and in this case, we're not going to actually do the include. Normally, when you get back a list of items, you don't necessarily want to have all their details, whereas when you go get an individual item, you usually want the full aggregate, the full object graph. That's a design decision that I made. You can implement this however you want. Now, if we look at the specification definition, when we want to get an author by their ID, and in that case include their courses, this is what that looks like. So we're just going to assign the property of predicate. It has a protected setter, so we can specify that it is this expression. And then for the include expression, we're going to include courses and each individual course as part of that. Now, finally, when we want to execute this, we can just run an HTTP query to run it. Let me just get that set up. Now this gets a list of all the authors, and then if we want to also have one that does get by ID, you see that in the case where we do a get by ID, it includes all of the courses with the course information for each course. So that's basically it. That's all you have to do to get a very simple specification set up. Create something that includes the kinds of things you want to be able to apply to your query. This will usually be predicate at a minimum, oftentimes include if you're using EF Core, and it might include other things like order by or additional metadata. Now, if you want to take this to the next level and you don't want to have to reinvent this wheel all by yourself, In my next video, I'm going to talk about the Ardalis specification NuGet package that you can use. And when you're using that, you can just inherit from my specification base type and not have to have all that stuff yourself. In fact, you don't have to implement the repository either because we have a default repository that you can inherit from. And so none of this code is anything you have to maintain. Hope you found this useful. If you did, I hope you'll like, subscribe, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave a comment below. Thanks.